Hey everyone, I'm Jay, and this is part 2 on media queries. Part 1, we talked about purpose of media queries, the syntax, how to select breakpoints, all right? And then part 2, we're actually going to code some media queries and test them out here in CodePen. And I'll link this CodePen in the description of both part 1 and part 2 for anyone who wants to take a look at it. Right. What I have here is a fairly straightforward, just a kind of a dummy page, same page that I've used in another video as well on the grid. So this is built with the grid. Right, the grid and media queries together are very powerful. Together and separate, those are my two favorite things in CSS. Grid and media queries. So this is actually should be the mobile view, all right? And you'll see it turned red when I put it into mobile view. I do have one thing in my media query already set up, okay? So I have, this is the HTML, just a page, header, nav, a side, a main, and a footer. You can see all that content right here. Nothing too spectacular. I do have the aside is not on the side right now, right? It's all in a stacked layout for mobile view. I'm using the grid and I'm using named areas, which we'll take a look at in just a moment. The aside, the HTML, comes before the main, but because it's the grid, it's very easy for me to actually put the aside after the main. All right, that's one of the really awesome powers of the grid, is now the order of the HTML doesn't make as much of a difference because I can arrange the grid however the grid needs to be arranged. But let's have a look at this CSS. All right, there's a few boilerplate things in here, a bunch of comments, some HTML. This is the definition of the grid. And this is just a couple of minor tweaks from a previous example on the grid that I made. That example had two asides. For this one, I'm only using one, so that's the main difference. And I'm using named template areas because I feel like that's the easiest way to define a grid. All the code goes into the grid parent element, and the only thing that goes into the children is just the name on each one. So, and I've named them all literally what they are. So a header is named header, main is named main, aside is named aside, footer is named footer, and we saw that nav was named nav. So all that's going to stay up there. I'm not going to change any of that. That's the mobile CSS, right? And here are all of my media queries. These are the exact same ones that are from my slideshow from video 1, which I will link here in the description as well. The only CSS that I have in here so far is to change the background color to red when I'm in mobile view. When I'm first testing out big layout things specifically, but when I'm first testing things out, I like to do really obvious, like a background color of red change, especially for media queries, so I can see exactly where that breakpoint happens, and it's painfully obvious when it does happen. So I like to use things like a big bold background color, red, green, blue, yellow, big bright colors, and then I'll change them because they're so obvious. I will have to change them before I go live, but I'll make big, bold, obvious color definitions when I'm setting something up. So you'll see that here. Let's have a quick look at just the syntax of the media query. All of these media queries are only screen. I'm not concerned with print, not today. So they're only screen, and then this one for phone only is all screens up to a maximum size of 599 pixels. The next one starts at a minimum of 600 pixels, and then anything larger than that. Remember to have that 1 pixel difference, because if I had set this to 600 and this to 600, then for that one precise size at 600, anybody who had that screen side would actually get both of these media queries in effect at the same time, and that may or may not cause unexpected results for that person, and chances are that person is going to be somebody who, it's probably going to be somebody who has the boss's ear or whatever when you're building this and you finally go live. It happens more often than not for some reason. It's crazy. So don't make that mistake. I've made that mistake at least once before. I learned my lesson the hard way. You shouldn't have to. So I have this set. Body background color is red on mobile. Every other screen size will get what I have set up here at the top. This color here, 696, which is a green color. I'm starting mobile first, so I really should have this as being empty, right? All my code at the top should be mobile to begin with. So let's take this out of here and let's start building from the tablet and beyond. So I'm going to put my colors into these other sizes here. So now the mobile size is green, that's the default, and then the tablet is going to be red, and it's going to stay red forever as long as that screen size is larger because it's in the 600 pixels and up media query. Okay, so I could take this, copy this, put it into here, put another color, blue. Okay, so now default is green. If it's tablet and larger, it's going to be red. If it's landscape tablet and larger, it's going to be still red, but then blue. And because cascading style sheets, the blue comes later, it overrides the red. So bound to green, red, and blue. Okay. So keep in mind when you are making your style sheets, your media queries, it's a good idea to start at the smallest screen and move in order to the largest screen. If you put these out of order, you're going to get mixed results because whatever happens later in the CSS will have a chance to override previous values. So any changes that you need to make, and I'm going to make some setting changes for starting with tablet landscape and up. I think this is wide enough to actually have our aside on the side. And so the way I would want to code that is, let's come up and just grab this whole piece of CSS right here. I'm not going to use all of it, but I do like to copy and paste. Oops. So I'm going to copy and bring that down to the media query where I want to set it. Okay, so I'm going to have this here. Remember to tab over a little bit for readability. Okay, readability is super important because future you is going to be making edits to your code. And if you're not nice to future you, nobody else is going to be. You'll hear me say it all the time. Future you is going to look at some piece of code and say, what kind of an idiot wrote? Oh yeah, I did. Don't do that to yourself, right? Try and take care of future you. So only code I want to have in this media query are the things that I want to override from previous media queries or from the vanilla no media query CSS up at the top. And the only thing I want to override from this size and larger in this case is I want to rearrange the grid and put my aside actually on the side instead of in this stacked layout. So the way I'm going to do that is I already have my columns and rows set up, and I'm going to I'm just going to do that right there, change my template area, my grid template area's naming to have the main and the aside next to each other. I don't have to change this, although I will change the rows because now I have one less row. And instead of leaving an empty row, I will just remove that. Display grid and grid template columns doesn't change. Grid gap doesn't change. I'm going to remove that. I'm going to leave these values in there, even though they do overwrite the same content. For completeness, I'm going to leave that in there because I feel that's an important setting to the grid, and to future-proof my code, just in case future me wants to make some changes that do need to have that there. I'm just going to leave that piece of code in there. It's not really going to slow anything down. It's just overriding two settings that are already set. But for completeness and to help me be able to read what's going on here when future me comes to edit my code, I'm just going to leave that there. So now let's see this media query in action. It's there. It's already running. We can see my aside is actually on the side when my screen, the viewable window, remember the screen is not the full screen width. It could be, but it's actually just the width of the viewport in the browser. And this viewport, it's actually an iframe. It is half my screen size right now. Okay? So as I extend this and make it larger, right, it's just going to follow the settings there. I think I have it set to be like a maximum of 1,000 pixels wide and then be centered. And then as I shrink it and it gets to be below 900, it's going to reverse that change. Right? This media query, because my screen width or my viewport width is no longer 900 pixels and up, it's at least 899 and below, this does not apply anymore. And so whatever changes happened here are now undone, and we only get the previous stacked layout, and we get that red color. And if I continue to move down, now I don't even get this bit of CSS any longer because now I'm below 600, so I don't even get this red color. And we can put literally any CSS that you want in there, and when the screen size gets within whatever parameters you set, mostly we're talking about width, but there are a few other things you can set, which I have not mentioned. They're beyond the scope of this video anyway. There are a few other things you can set, but we're pretty much just talking about width. Whenever your screen falls into that parameter, all this CSS that you put in here will apply. Some things to note when you're writing media queries. Don't forget your curly brace at the end. Okay, your last CSS selector and style rule is going to have its curly brace. And don't forget that media query curly brace. If you forget to close a media query with that curly brace, and then you start another media query, that second media query that you start doesn't actually work because you never close the first one. Any style that you put in the second one will actually be part of the first one because the first one never got closed. So don't make that mistake. And another thing to make sure that you do is make sure all of your CSS selectors have their appropriate opening and closing curly braces as well. Basically, the media query is adding one level of hierarchy around your CSS. It's saying, hey, we could make a whole other file and apply that file only to screens of this size. There is a way to do that. But we're putting this all into one file instead. And that's what the media query does. It allows you to say, here's a bunch of CSS that only applies to whatever parameters we choose here. Okay, so it only applies to screens, and screens when their width is a minimum of 900 pixels, but anything larger than that, they're going to get this blue background, and we're going to rearrange the grid here. Okay. So we can put anything in there. We can change the way the images are laid out. We can change the color of links. We can change the color of the header, font colors, font sizes. That's a really important one, actually. When we go from small screens to large screens, the font size does oftentimes need to change in some way. So that's an important one. But anything else that you need to change in here, We could change the default height and width for images for smaller screens. Maybe the images should be displayed a little bit smaller so we can fit them all on screen better. Literally anything, okay? Maybe it could be just a color, could be a layout, it could be anything. Whatever CSS you want to put in here, you can, right? In my example, I just did one of the more common ones is to rearrange the grid, super common, and because I used the named areas in the grid, it becomes super easy to rearrange this whole thing, okay? Before the grid was around, that would have taken quite a lot of code. With the grid, 2 lines of code changed. And then I wrote 2 extra lines of code just to make it more readable. All right, that's it. Change the whole layout. That's it. That is media queries in action and using a grid. Hope you learned something. Thanks for watching.